Welcome, everyone, to one of my favorite classes, just because it's so much fun. I mean, it's not fun, but it is fun. And the topic is bugs and other things. So bugs, class about managing weeds and pests. All right. So one of the things that will be helpful as you look at your landscape, not just in terms of weeds and pests, but just in terms of its overall health, is a guidebook called California Watershed Approach to Landscape Design. And it will be coming with a series of other links and resources, and you will be getting that tomorrow evening. If for some reason you don't get it, send us a link and we will be happy to get that to you. So a big thank you to our sponsors. They may come on a little bit later to say hello, but we've got California American Water, we've got the Water Awareness Committee of Monterey County, and we have the Monterey Peninsula Water Management District. So thank you for supporting these classes. So the way we are going to navigate this class is by looking at how everything is connected. So we're not just looking at bugs, we're not just looking at weeds, but really the way everything touches something else. And so the 6 topics that we're going to be covering tonight, we're going to start out with the basics, and you'll see what that is in just a moment. Then number 2 is a concept called integrated pest management. And that really is, again, the lens through which we will look at managing weeds and pests. Number 3 is actually identifying what those pests actually are. Number 4, prevention. So how do we keep them from becoming a nuisance? Number 5, at the point where they have become a little bit annoying, what can we do to control them? And the first 4, 5 are really focusing on our pests. And then honeycomb number 6 is taking a look at weeds specifically. So let us try to define a pest. Again, a pest is really in the eye of the beholder. A pest could be a plant. It can be a vertebrate, such as birds or rodents or other mammals. We had some listed already in the chat box. Invertebrates like ticks and mites, nematodes, and then pathogens. And basically, the 2 sort of key thoughts about that is, one, that they may harm water quality, animal life, or other parts of the ecosystem. And then number 2 is very human-centric, so that our harmful effect on humans, their food, and their living conditions. So we start with that as a definition. But here's the thing that is so interesting, is when we look at insects, and we're not looking at, mammals at this point, but just insects, only 3% of them are actually harmful. When we look at a plant such as a stinging nettle, which you might consider a weed, yet they can be fried up and served for dinner. There are nematodes, there are bad nematodes, but there are also good nematodes, which are very, very important to maintaining a balance. And so really the pest is in the eye of the beholder. So a lot of folks were talking about the spiders, and yet they play a critical role in actually managing a lot of those pests. So let's begin at the beginning with basics. Balanced watershed. So when we talk about the landscape, we're not using terms like sustainable or xeriscaping, but really the idea that we look to the model of the watershed. So a watershed is defined as an area of land where all the water that flows over it or under it drains to the same place. So we look at this graphic, which really explains it in just a lovely way. You've got precipitation. That precipitation is slowed by the plants. As it makes its way to the ground, it flows overland. Some of it makes its way into a body of water. In this case, it's a river. But some of that water actually will percolate into the soil. And as it does so, it is cleaned and filtered by plant roots and by biology that is in the soil. Then from there, some of that water will actually continue to move through the soil with gravity, making its way into the river. And if there's enough water that has percolated into the soil, it will go ahead and continue down. And that is how we replenish our aquifers. Then the sun comes out, the water evaporates or evapotranspires, goes back up into the sky, and we start this process all over again. So when we think of this watershed in a large setting, you've got mountains and you've got rivers, but we want you to think about watersheds in a very local way. The idea that your individual properties can be watersheds. So we look at the top of the roof, that's like the top of a mountain. You look at the street, it's a lot like a river. And really everything in between is within our capacity to improve. You're going to see why this is important, why we start with this in just a moment. So there's four key principles. The first one, super important, is the quality of our soil. We want what we call a living soil sponge. So the ability of the soil to hold on to water when we get it, and then to release it to the plants as they need it. Number two is selecting climate appropriate plants. Also very important when it comes to weeds and pests. Yes, natives, but it doesn't have to be exclusively so. Number three, holding onto rainwater as a resource. And then number four, irrigation. No longer looking at it as the default, but rather making sure that it is highly efficient and that we use it really only when it's necessary. So image on the left, a conventional landscape where you've got compacted soil, rainwater is running off, not a lot of diversity of plants, soil is depleted. Image on the right, there is that watershed-wise landscape, right? A diversity of plants holding on to the rainwater, that living soil sponge, and minimal irrigation. And so here is an image of that living soil sponge. And when we teach these classes live, we sometimes bring one and we say, what are the similarities there? And people will shout out, oh, it's those little holes. And so the soil sponge works just like a sea sponge or a kitchen sponge, where when there's water, it just soaks it up and then you can wring it out and the soil stays moist. So that moisture is available to the plants, even though, you're not creating drops out of it. And then of course you've got that juicy worm in it, and then all of those roots that have all this room to expand. Climate appropriate plants. So again, these are plants that are adapted to your particular climate. And again, yes, you can absolutely have natives. We encourage natives, but it doesn't have to be exclusively so. There's room for lots and lots of diversity. So be abundant, be diverse in your plant selections. And then holding on to that rain. So a couple of years ago, I think we got 73 trillion gallons of water in the rain, of rain in the state of California. We held on to about 10% of it. All of that other water was lost to us. So, as we go into a year where who knows what we're going to get, the possibility that more of that could have been stored in our landscapes. And then, of course, and this is very important when it comes to the health of your garden, the idea that when we irrigate, that we are striving to find a balance of oxygen and water. So oftentimes, most of the time, when people think about irrigation, it's like, oh, I need to add water to my plants. But really what we're looking for is making sure that there's water in there, but that there is also oxygen in there. So obviously, you know what happens when there's not enough water, too much oxygen, your plants will wilt, potentially croak, but it's also possible to overwater. In which case there's not enough oxygen. And when that happens, you create what are called anaerobic conditions. We actually had a situation just a couple of weeks ago where the water was not draining and the soil got really funky smelling. So that is a sign when something doesn't smell good, that things have gotten out of balance. All right, moving on more specifically now to pests. And in pests, this integrated pest management, they also do include weeds. Eek! Bugs! So again, in the chat, what is eating my zinnias, my cabbage, my carrots, my tomatoes. The tendency, unfortunately, whenever we see bugs, any kind of bugs, is to get out that poison and just spray. And the problem, of course, is in doing that, we kill not only the potential bug, if it really was the pest, we kill everything in the process. So integrated pest management is a way of looking at how we deal with imbalances. So it is an integrated, science-based approach that combines various techniques. We're going to talk about those. It looks at the actual cycles of a pest. It just doesn't assume it's a one and done, and how that pest interacts with its environment. And of course, very importantly, it reduces the risk to humans and the environment at large. So there's 5 key points. The first one is to identify and monitor what the actual problem is. And for each of these, we will go ahead and do a drill down. Number 2 is then evaluating how bad is the damage? Do I actually have to do something about this particular pest? Number 3, having identified a potential pest, what can I do to prevent that from getting worse? And number 4, again, if it's gotten a little bit out of control, what can you do to bring it back under control? And then number 5 is going back and reevaluating and monitoring it to find out, is it actually getting better or are things worse? So you don't just make these general assumptions about what's happening. So super important is actually identifying that pest. Uh, again, something is munching on your leaves. It could be anything. We were sitting and talking just a little bit ago, is it something with 4 legs? Is it something with 6 legs? Is it a snail? So it's really important to understand what is actually causing the damage so that you can take the right steps in order to mitigate it. Next up is to evaluate how severe the actual problem is. How great is your tolerance? So here we have whiteflies, which can be very annoying. Is it just a few of them fluttering around? Or, do you feel like you're walking through a snowstorm every time you go through your garden? And then not forgetting that a few of them are actually food for potentially something else, but we'll be talking about that later. So here are the management tools for integrated pest management, and it starts out with really sort of the most general, the least work, the least toxic, and the greatest impact. So we start out with prevention, which is again, what can you do to keep this from becoming an annoyance or a problem? Next up is looking at what are your conditions and exploring, are there things that I am doing in my garden or in my landscape that if I were to change those behaviors, I could address the problem. Physical and mechanical are what are particular barriers that I can set in place to protect my plants. Uh, Biological are going to be our natural predators. And then in a very small triangle up at the top are chemical solutions. So we basically don't want chemical solutions to be the first thing that we turn to when we address our so-called problems. So in the very beginning, when we started out with watershed-wise landscapes and what the 4 key components of those were, they are fundamental to the prevention element of this process. So you are looking at how healthy your soils are. You are looking at the plants that you are choosing. Are they adapted? Are they resistant? So what are ways that you can, by creating a healthy landscape, actually minimize the amount of problems, issues that you might have? Some of the ways that you address that, one of the big complaints, for example, is, my tomatoes get this terrible virus. And so some of the ways that you can address that is by rotating your crops. So the idea that when you have plants, especially with edibles that are planted in the same place over and over again, what ends up happening is you can potentially deplete some of the nutrients in the soil. And then the other thing that happens is that if a pathogen or a virus gets established in the soil, and then you come around and bring in a similar plant the following year, that stuff's in the soil and it is just waiting. So they recommend that you not plant tomatoes, same thing year after year. And I believe it's like every 5 years, it takes 5 years before you bring those same crops back in. And Pamela is actually an expert in regenerative agriculture. So if you have questions specifically about edible gardens, cover cropping, some of the ways that you can look at, protecting edibles in particular, ask her your questions. Now, cultural practices. So what is it that you do in your landscape that could potentially be making things worse? So one of the number one problems is watering, and people assume it's underwatering, but it's actually overwatering. So we talked about that situation where you've got too much water in there, not enough oxygen, and you get this stuff in there that will rot the roots, that creates these microbes in there that will actually kill the plant. Other things, interestingly enough, are actually using chemicals. So fertilizers, for example. When we bring in chemicals, we are upsetting the balance. So one of the things, a few things about fertilizers is if you apply fertilizers, one, you are disrupting the relationship that plants have with the biology in the soil, which is how they get their nutrients. So there is this incredible complex relationship between plants and biology in the soil. So fertilizers mess that up. Another thing that fertilizers will do is they will accelerate growth, which we think is a good thing, but in fact, basically becomes a red flag to pests who go, ooh, juicy, green, yummy, and they will actually be attracted to a plant. And in addition, that growth is also more vulnerable and weaker than if it had been left to its own devices. And then certainly if you've got squirrels or you've got gophers or you've got moles, making sure that your premises, rats, making sure that your premises stay clean. Speaking of gophers, I know that one showed up a few times on the chat. So it may be, and especially with edible gardens where you don't want them coming up and eating your carrots or your potatoes, is it may require a mechanical practice where you're actually putting down screening and the beds are high enough that they can't make their way in. And then the idea of bringing in biological, we actually, instead of predators, now call them allies. And so when we were again looking at the watershed wise principles, and we talked about climate adapted plants, this is one of the reasons. And so it is an abundance of plants. It is a diversity of plants, because the more plants you have, the more life comes into the garden, and these natural predators will go ahead and take care of a lot of your problems. So ladybugs is like one of the most well-known. And then, of course, with chemical controls. So it could be, if there's incredible invasion of whatever, that this is what you need to resort to. Obviously, you are starting with the least toxic. So we go from soaps to oils to insecticides. And whenever you see the word sides, that means kill. So pesticides, herbicides, insecticides. Super important to read those directions. Don't take it for granted that you know what you need to do. A lot of them are going to be effective based on what time of the day, what time of the year, where a particular pest is in its cycle. So this is why it's integrated pest management, not just you get your spray and you squirt. And then here's another one that we wanted to talk about in just a little bit more detail, and that is the neonicotinoids. This is an insecticide, is unfortunately more and more common. It is one of the reasons we strongly encourage when you are buying your plants to buy them from smaller local nurseries that don't use this. It is water soluble, so these are the reasons why it is so popular. It's water soluble, it's easy to apply, but it is being found everywhere. Everywhere in the country, in the water, in the soil. Its half-life is 1,000 days. That's basically 3 years, and it will actually live in a woody plant up to a year. And what they are finding is that even though this was supposed to keep, those little biting insects away, the consequences of that is that they are toxic to our pollinators, to our beneficial insects, and even to our aquatic invertebrates. All right, and then that last piece, did it work? So you saw the pest, you go back out, you've done your treatments, what have you. Are there less of them? Less biting, less, snow, what have you? Can you see an improvement? And if not, going back and evaluating, what do we need to do differently? Okay, next up, identifying pests. So this was one of the things that I mentioned beforehand when we were looking at those little pesky whiteflies, is that yes, they are annoying to us as humans, but they didn't just randomly show up on our plants to annoy us. They have a role in the balance of things. And so if we wipe out everything, there's this, oh, let's get rid of all the aphids, then what are the other animals going to eat? So just remembering, yes, if you have an infestation, that's one thing, but a few of them for the birds to eat, for the spiders to eat, what have you, they are needed. That being said, there are some that are definitely more than annoying. So here you've got the mosquitoes. There's a couple of different varieties. This is the Culex mosquito. There's the other one, this tropical one, and definitely with climate change, we are seeing different critters making their way into places where they have not been before, or we're not getting the frosts that are killing them. So yes, things are continuing to change. This is the Aedes mosquitoes. So here is their life cycle. There is oftentimes a question when we talk about rain gardens, are mosquitoes a problem? And I completely understand why this would be a concern. And when it comes to rain gardens, no. So let me explain why. So you look at this cycle as it goes from that mosquito laying her eggs in water. Then you've got the larva. Larva lives in water for about 5 days. And then you've got another 2 or 3 days before it will take flight. So basically, when it comes to standing water, anything longer than 72 hours is potentially a problem. But if you've got water sitting in a rain garden, for example, for a few hours, that is not a problem. Do not need to worry about that. So here we've got photos to match it. Basically, they are quick reproducers, under 2 weeks, and you can see how they look in their different stages. And one of the things that's really, really interesting about this one in particular is that it can survive dry periods. So it's not enough that you not have standing water, but you also have to be aware that if you've had standing water and potentially eggs were laid in there, that with rain or with watering, they could actually still be viable. So it really is needing to be vigilant on sources of standing water. This is another one potentially we can all agree on. Some of my friends have them as pets, but I don't necessarily want them in my garden. Squirrels, we were definitely talking about them, tree squirrels, and how they steal the fruit before you can harvest them. Ants, the old ant in the picnic basket. Ticks, for sure, the possibility that some of these insects actually carry disease, serious disease. So yeah, we don't want them around. Aphids, compared to some of the other things we're talking about, not so much. Um, and so now let's go ahead. We've talked about identifying pests, um, and let's start talking a little bit more about how do we prevent it. So we've kind of alluded to some of that, but let's go ahead and take a deeper dive. We come back to the soil again, come back to this watershed wise landscape. And what happens is this good biology, so we talked about pathogens and we've talked about, bad nematodes, but there is a lot of good biology, and that is what we want to stimulate. And the biology doesn't just live in the soil. It will actually travel up into the plant, out into the branches, out into the leaves, and it provides basically a defense shield. Not quite the double rainbow that you see here, but having that good biology in the soil that moves up into the plant actually helps protect the plant as well. So if it gets a virus or it gets a little powdery mildew or it gets a little, chewed on, it is much more resilient. It also helps with making it more drought tolerant. So the healthier the soil is, the more deeper the roots can go, the more resilient that plant is when it comes to stress from water or lack thereof. Here's that anaerobic life that we were talking about. So something like, some of these are like from horror movies when we see some of these pictures. And this is key when it comes to prevention for mosquitoes, is where is water standing? And it can be in the most innocuous of places, in a tire, in a bird bath. I mean, I am guilty of that sometimes. You water it a couple times, you go away on vacation, and there's just a few drops in there, but that's all it needs. This one is the water that is coming out from an air conditioning unit. You've got that moisture that leaves the cooling system, and it's being gathered in a bucket. All of a sudden, we've got standing water there. Check your septic tank for potential cracks or places where the seal has been damaged, because they are incredibly, it's like rats, incredibly able to get into small spaces. If you're going to get a rain barrel, which is a great thing to do, make sure that it has a screen so that they can't get in there and lay their eggs. And then this one, who would have thought, right? You have a tree that hasn't been pruned very well, or it rains, the water stands there for a few days. Yeah. And then this one, when it comes to prevention, is definitely within our control to manage, right? This is potentially a leaky pipe or a leaking drip system, and you've got water that's not draining well, or that's ponding or puddling. It stands there for a few days, and you've got mosquito head. And it's not just outdoors, it's also indoors. Do you have water that's sitting in a vase? Is there a rip in your screen? So yes, we must be diligent and vigilant. And the thing to look at is mosquitoes don't recognize property lines. So just because you're doing a really good job with watching your monitoring doesn't necessarily mean that your neighbors are. So if you see standing water in a neighbor, go over and share this information with them, and keep those guys at bay. All right, speaking of rats, a huge one is keeping your premises clean, so that they can't easily get into the trash cans. If you've got fruit that's fallen, that's easy, just pick it up, don't let it sit there. And seal any holes. This is another one that I had an experience with. They were able to get up into my attic. And we found a couple of teeny tiny openings that they were able to squeeze themselves into. So, yeah. And then this is another one that you can definitely look at, and that is the idea that they like easy places to hide. This is cool and hidden. And so the idea that you've got, these masses of dense plantings, things like ivies, lantanas, vincas, uh, potentially make things just a little bit easier and comfortable for these. And they're very, very smart. Very smart creatures. And then, if your animals can eat it, so can the rodents. So if you're going to put out pet food, fine, but bring it in at night. Don't throw it out so that they can come along and just have a banquet on your front lawn. Now here we're starting to look at more mechanical systems. So this was actually built because they had issues with deer. So they weren't coming up from the ground, they were coming down from the hillsides. And so this edible garden is completely fenced in. Obviously, you can lift off the screen so that you can access it, water it, what have you. And then we've talked about staying away from chemicals such as fertilizers. So I talked about how it weakens the plant, how it disrupts that relationship with biology. And then because of that higher nitrogen, that's what they're using to stimulate all that growth, actually makes them less resistant to pests. So we're actually making things worse when we apply the chemicals. Now, here's another one you may not have considered, and that was the impact of your pruning. So not only is it when do you prune, you would not want to be pruning in the middle of summer unless, there was an urgent reason. It is so stressful on your plant. Every time we prune a plant, we are wounding it. We don't think of it that way. But you cut a branch and all of a sudden the plant needs to take its resources to heal itself rather than focusing on growing its roots. So we say really, prune if there's a branch that is dead, if it's been diseased and you can't just hose it off, if it's been damaged, say in the winds, or deranged. So basically you bought a plant that's like this, and then it's got, a wonky branch. Okay, go ahead and do it once. And then certainly when it comes to your trees, bring in a specialist. So to have a tree pruned, if you can even call it that, hacked, is basically a death knell to your trees. And they are the biggest, most important investment in your landscape. So bring in someone who knows what they are doing. Okay, so we talked about what we could do in order to prevent pests, weeds. Now let's take a look at, they are in. What do we do about it? Diversity. So the idea here is that there are lots and lots of different kinds of plants, and it's not just above ground, like it's easy to go, oh, this attracts bees, and it attracts ladybugs, and it attracts hummingbirds and what have you. But it's also the diversity that happens below the ground. So we come back to the soil again and again. So each plant is attracting different biology, and that diversity in the biology helps the soil become ever more porous, ever healthier, with more nutrients. And it's just this beautiful upcycling of growth and resilience in the landscape. We've talked about how pests are food for our natural predators. This is just an incredible image. So you've got a hornworm, which we would definitely, consider a pest, eating our vegetables there. And so you've got these little wasps that basically, plant their eggs onto this thing, and it eats it from the inside out. This is where we get into the science fiction part. Other things that we can do as far as controls is creating shelter for our natural allies. So in this case, this is a hawk. So for those that have the squirrels or have the gophers or have the moles, one of the biggest things you can do is invite their natural predators into the landscape. Creating shelter below ground. So this is actually a native bee. We tend to think of bees in hives, but there are actually many, many bees that also live below the ground. So how do we create welcoming spaces for them so that they can do their job in keeping that balance? Shelters. This is not only fun, but the benefits are tremendous. That you can build an insect condo, that you can build a bird house, bringing art into the garden, if you will. And that shelter comes in all shapes and sizes. I said spices because of the spiders. So a few people were concerned about spiders, and I understand, but not all spiders are black widows or even brown spiders, and they are critical in catching those mosquitoes, other annoying flying insects, flies. So, if they're not in your path, let them be. We want to attract the birds. They eat all kinds of things. Make sure that the water is moving so that we don't have issues with the mosquitoes. And not only the birds, but also insects. And then, of course, providing food. So I think birds are perhaps one of the greatest delights in a garden. Whether they're migrating or they stay local, is what can we plant in this diversity of plantings that will invite them to come and stay or come and visit and take care of some of our more annoying pests as well. And that food can look like lots of different things. Of course, it can be berries, it can be seeds, it can be blossoms, it can be nectar. So again, all four of these actually are all California natives. And then the natural predators. I remember you used to be able to, I'm assuming you still can, right away for the ladybugs or the praying mantis. And the thing about the ladybugs is they are incredible, and it's both in their beetle as well as their larval stage. They will eat up to 50 aphids a day. Crazy. This is another one, the parasitic wasp. Same thing, it lays its egg inside of an aphid, and then that egg hatches and basically eats the aphid from the inside out. Wild, that nature. Assassin bug, as its name implies, look at all of the different pests that it dines on. Potentially you would see this in the garden and you would go, eek, right? But this is actually a really, really good bug. You should see this and celebrate. Mealybug destroyer. This reminds me of like a snowman somehow. So the mealybug is actually a little further up on the right of the branch. The mealybug destroyer is the little cotton ball thing. Oftentimes you find mealybugs on citrus. They will sort of drill down, they cause the sap, which then attracts the ants. And so you've got this sort of icky cycle. That mealybug destroyer keeps them under control. And then, of course, you've got all the different birds that are dining on worms, cabbage worms, hornworms, I'll say caterpillars. Without the caterpillars, you don't get the butterflies, you don't get the moths. So again, yeah, you have to remember. And here's the thing is even hummingbirds can be carnivorous. So we always think of them of going into the flowers for the nectar, but they will also eat bugs. And one of the easiest ways that you can control it is by simply spraying it. Turn your hose up to high power and then just spray down the leaves. And, it sort of knocks the bugs out. They fall to the ground. The birds come along, have a fine dinner, and it's just easy, non-toxic. Nobody gets hurt, especially during the summer. Lots of fun for the kids to do. When it comes to our larger pests, our squirrels, our gophers, our moles, raptors are the solution. So the idea that you bring in these predator birds, you can certainly go to UC has an integrated pest management website. It's a great site, giving you lots and lots of lists and lists of all potential pests, and then different ways that you can manage them. You'll be getting that link. And then when it comes to rodents, we want to make sure we never ever bring poison in as a way to treat them. It seems intuitive, and yet the idea is that you never know who else is going to find that poison or what's going to eat that poisoned rodent. So never use that as a solution. Other ways you can invite those birds in, those big birds, is to actually build or order an owl nesting box. How cool is that? Um, and now we're going to look at some of these, and you may go, "Oh my gosh, there's no way that I would want that in my garden." Um, and yet it's that same thing. Only 3% of insects are harmful. Not all snakes are rattlers. This is a gopher snake, and they are called gopher snakes for a very specific reason. They help keep gophers under control. You can see some of the ways or places that they like to call home. Coyotes. I've got a mole, call in a coyote. Now, question is, do you want a coyote running through your front yard? Maybe not, but they are part of the balance to the system. They will eat mice, rats, gophers, rabbits, and squirrels. So I see someone has raised their hand. Put your question in the Q&A, and I'm sure Pamela would love to be able to answer it. How do we get coyotes into our front yards? This is really cool. Native lizard, the western fence lizard. And it is great at controlling beetles, ants, flies, caterpillars, and ticks. I believe there's something in its actual, in its skin that will actually poison the ticks. And so it's not just that it eats them, but it has a very negative impact when they attempt to suck on them. And again, herons, yes, eat more than fish. Bat bugs, so not only the critters that you see during the day, but potentially the ones that come at night. They are wonderful at clearing out your mosquitoes, because that's typically when they're flying around. So how do you bring bats into your landscape? And then, of course, if you have water and it's not running water, the potential that you bring in mosquito fish. Or you can go ahead and buy these little mosquito dunks. They come in like little, either little donuts or in like these little pellets that you can put in, and they supposedly keep the mosquitoes away. And this is an interesting example. This was actually designed by Pamela. So this used to be a side yard, did not look like this. And every time it would rain, the water would just drain in there, and then it would just stand, wouldn't go anywhere. And so it was basically, when you've got a lemon, turn it into a lemonade. They regraded it. They added compost and mulch in order to improve the quality of the soil, to make it more porous, so that we didn't get that water just standing there. And then they planted it, obviously added some beautiful stones as well. So what had been a mosquito magnet is now a really lovely feature. Okay, in the last few minutes, we are going to talk about weeds. So don't wait until 7 o'clock to ask your questions. Whatever your pest is, or your weed is, or what you'd like advice on, or anything. It doesn't even have to be on this topic. Are you looking for a good tree? Anything. Keep her busy up until the end. Weeds, similar to pests, a plant growing where it is not desired, a plant whose virtues have not yet been discovered, and again, of approximately 250,000 species of plants, only 3% behave as weeds. And weeds have a key place when we talk about the health of the soil. So the idea that there is this universe happening beneath the soil. We've got bacteria, we've got protozoa, we've got nematodes. They eat each other as they release their waste that provides nutrients for the soil. And then the weeds come in when the soil has been disturbed, and we have this activity that's getting started. And basically, the thing about a weed is, we're going to talk about some of the benefits in just a minute, but their lifespan is so short. So they live and die, live and die, live and die, for the most part, very quickly. And then their bodies fall, decompose, and that organic matter is what feeds the soil party and really stimulates that transformation from compacted, depleted soils to much healthier soils. pizza in the form of organic matter. And in terms of the benefits, if we step away from what is, the human centric way of looking at life, everything has a place, everything has a role. And so when you look at these plants that we might consider weeds, they have a particular role. They show up in the soils in particular conditions. So if you're seeing dandelions or plantains or creeping thistles or mallow weeds, they have these tremendous taproots, and they are how they break up the compaction, right? So if you're seeing dandelions, they are going to work. Plus, you can put them in your salads. And there's some great resources out there that basically say if you are seeing these kinds of weeds, these are potentially some of the reasons why they are showing up. They are clues, if you want, on all kinds of potential issues. So everything from pH to water issues, to compactions, a big one, to fertility, and to nutrient levels. And so really the invitation is to move away from this idea of a monoculture where you've got your grass, especially with the grass, right? It's only one kind of grass and you're using all kinds of herbicides to make sure that it stays only one kind of grass. But the idea that if you let the weeds come in, or we actually call them forbs rather than weeds, that they can enhance the garden significantly. So the example here, we've got clovers in there, plantains, and the little Bellis daisies. And the more diversity you have, the more resilience you have, the more water conserving you can do with your landscape. Coming back to that idea of diversity, we talk about the solar panels, right? That's how they manage the photosynthesis, is through their leaves. And so the more variety we have, the greater the ability of those plants to do so. That diversity goes down into their roots. And what's fascinating here is a lot of people, for example, you've got Bermuda grass, you've got St. Augustine's grass, and you go, oh my God, the roots are so deep, I'll never get rid of them. And you dig down maybe, I don't know, 6, 8 inches. These are the roots of other prairie plants that go down 12, 13, 14 feet. This is what is possible in our landscapes. This is what we want to encourage, and the way we get there is with these watershed-wise landscapes. That diversity continues not just into the roots, but then the fungi. That's becoming more and more well known, and yet we are still learning so much about how it functions, the role that it functions. It's how plants communicate with each other. So yes, we want all of that growing. And as a result, soil sponge builds, and that creates more resilient, thriving plants. The healthier your plants are, it's just like us, the healthier we are, the less, when we get a cold or a cough or a bellyache, we are able to heal quicker, bounce back quicker. It's the exact same analogy for the landscape. Healthier the soil, the fewer the weeds, or if there are weeds, they are easier to cut down or to remove. The way we do that is by adding compost, which you can mix in or put on top, or and mulch. 3 to 4 inches helps basically suffocate the weeds or block the weeds from the sun, so they're not exposed to as much sun. And as that mulch is breaking down, it makes the soil more friable, easier to manipulate, right? It's not so compacted. And then we don't want to disturb the soil. So once upon a time, I remember it, you used to like double dig a garden, or you would cultivate it after each season. And every time we do that, it's basically like we've taken that biology universe and hit them with an earthquake, right? So you can cultivate one time to get that compost in, maybe a little bit deeper, and then we do not want to mess with it. It makes life easier, actually. Now, when we do that, not only are we adding compost, but we've basically disturbed the soil. So all kinds of other things might be popping out. So you may get some surprises when you do so. But the more friable that soil is, the easier it will be to keep those under control. Adding cover crops. So wherever we've got bare soil is the potential for water, especially where you're irrigating and you've got bare soil. They're just like, they go to town. So the more coverage there is that, shades the area, that basically blocks them, that minimizes the number of them, and the more cover crops, the faster our soil is improving. So it's just like this beautiful cycle that we just need to get into. So that was for edibles, the cover crops. In a regular landscape, it's ground covers, So this is Ceanothus here, a California native, but basically it's shading out lots of that undergrowth. And super important, don't let them go to seed. And I remember as little kids, you would take that dandelion and you would go, so yeah, we don't want to do, one of the easiest thing you can do is just cut it, as it sends up that pretty little yellow flower, just give it a snip before it goes to seed. And then when it comes to irrigation, wherever there's water, there's going to be plants or seeds that are going to germinate. So making sure that where we are applying water is only where the plants are that we want to grow, which is why drip is so much more efficient than spray, right? Because spray waters everything. Drip is applying water just to those root areas. Now, if you are doing, especially if you're doing a turf conversion where you're taking out turf and you're putting in climate appropriate plants, odds are you're going to see some sort of regrowth. Great odds you're going to see some sort of regrowth. You will get, if you have warm season grass, that will most likely come up. And again, because there's all kinds of seeds in the seed bank, those are probably going to come up as well. If it's a warm season grass, so that's a St. Augustine or a Bermuda or Zoysia, they've got the rhizomes or the stolons. Those you do need to pull out because they will just continue to grow even underground with no greenery above. With the weeds, for many of them, you can just cut them. The idea is that for the weeds, the leaves are their solar panels. That's how they're doing their photosynthesis. When we cut that, we basically depleted their food supply. So they may come back once or twice, but eventually that should help, and then apply compost. Now, one of the questions for those that are like, well, what do I do with this green? Can I somehow salvage it or repurpose it? Can I put it in my compost bin? Probably not. Most residential compost bins don't get hot enough. Now, if you are an active composter and you're hitting that magic number of 141 to 155 degrees, which is hot, I mean, that will burn you, then yes, you can cook your weed seeds. If it's unlikely that you are getting your compost that hot, then all you are doing is taking your weed seeds and spreading them out into the rest of the garden. Critical, we have a class in compost where we go into this in more detail. But basically what it means is again, it's all about balance, is having more carbon than nitrogen. So nitrogen are the kitchen waste, which is what we usually think of when we're composting. Carbon is going to be the dry, the leaves, the browns, and that it's actually more of that helps heat that compost. We keep it damp, and every so often we're turning it, getting oxygen in there. All right, so that brings us to the end of the formal presentation, just some resources that are available to you. A great website, the Monterey Water Conservation site. You will be getting a link in the email that you're getting tomorrow. They've got all kinds of resources and rebates there. They've got these great tree watering rings that you can get for free. And those are the two sites where you can just give them a call or show up and say, I'd like one of those, please. They really only work with baby trees. They're not going to work with big established trees, but if you've got a small tree that you're concerned about getting going, this is an option. Here are some of the resources that they provide. They will actually come out and do a free audit. They have a cash for grass rebate, which is $1 a square foot up to 2,500 square feet. They do have, conditions that you have to meet in order to qualify. They also have rebates on smart controllers, which are really helpful in managing your water balance. Soil moisture sensors, so you know how much water is actually in there. If you're interested in capturing rainwater, they have support for cisterns. And then we talked about those tree rings.